one would take opportunities that present themselves, and certainly there's no war. A war plan is something that is a plan that's developed before things start, and the minute things start, one has to take account of the realities that you find in the world, and that is what was done last evening. That is what will be done today and tomorrow and the next day, and to not do that would be a terrible mistake.
Having intel agencies and armed forces that are flexible is key to victory, and that's what you saw.
I really wasn't kidding when I said I think that that'll be the last question. Let me just make a comment. I did not answer a question as fully as I might have about do we have evidence that it's working. I often try to put myself in other people's shoes and ask myself, in this case, for example, an Iraqi citizen or Iraqi army soldier or an Iraqi officer or even a special Republican Guard official or even people closer to Saddam Hussein. What they have to be seeing is a good deal of evidence that the Iraqi people want to be liberated. We see a great deal of evidence of that. It's a natural human tendency for people that have been brutally repressed. It manifests itself in a host of ways. We see evidence of military personnel. Some have already surrendered in Kuwait. We are in communication with still more people who are officials of the military at various levels. The regular army, the Republican Guard, the Special Republican Guard, who are increasingly aware that it's going to happen, he's going to be gone, and what they are probably doing. I can't do this perfectly, but as I try to put myself in their shoes, they have to be fearful of that regime, because that regime kills people every day to enforce obedience and discipline. So they have to be fearful of the regime. On the other hand, once they are persuaded that that regime is history, it is going, it will not be there. In some reasonably finite period of time, they will be gone. Then their behavior begins to tip and change. And when I said we have good evidence, we have not only good evidence, but we have broad and deep evidence that suggests that there are people going through that decision-making process throughout that country today. And that is a good thing. Thank you very much.
Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld with his briefing. We want to go back to the Iraqi-Kuwait border where CBS News correspondent and 60 Minutes 2 correspondent Scott Pelley is standing by. Scott, you've been right there at the point of the spear, so to speak, as these helicopters have launched some attacks into Iraq. What's been happening in the last few minutes while this Pentagon briefing's been going on?
Well, in the last few minutes, Dan, the helicopters have withdrawn, and it is now a quiet, perfectly still night. But that wasn't the case about 30 minutes ago. About half an hour ago, we could hear at least one helicopter, perhaps two, as they came in from the night. Could not see them until they flew over the Iraqi border and began to unleash what appeared to be Hellfire missiles, guided missiles. We counted at least 9 of these fired, striking the ground. As you know, they're commonly used to attack armor, but there is also a communication center immediately behind me, just over the border, just a few hundred yards away. It's a communications tower that was on a mountain, and we saw a bright flash of light near that communications tower, and I suspect that when the sun comes up tomorrow, we will discover that it is no longer standing there. These helicopter attacks are often used as a prelude to the armor moving forward, but I should say at this moment we do not hear anything like that. There are American tanks and armored personnel carriers, British tanks and armored personnel carriers all around our position right here on the border, but they are not moving at this moment. And so what I can report to you for now is that it is all quiet on the southern front again.
Scott Pelley reporting live from a combat area right along the Iraqi-Kuwait border. Now, to bring you up to date, particularly for those of you who may have be joining us in progress. U.S. Missiles were fired at a position in Baghdad last night were believed to contain possibly Saddam Hussein, possibly one or more of his sons, and some of the Iraqi leadership. Now, a senior U.S. military official speaking on condition of anonymity has told the Associated Press that military intelligence was picking up signs and, quote, circumstantial evidence that Saddam and his senior leadership were either incapacitated or out of communications with battlefield commanders. But, this source went on to say, it's too early to say flatly if they were killed or wounded. He went on to say, we are seeing no coordinated response to our first attack. It's a little thing here and there. Some individual commanders are hunkering down while others are launching small attacks and setting fires. The fires are believed to be in the Basra area down in southern Iraq. The Iraqis have fired at least 3 missiles this morning. What kind of missiles we don't know. May have been the Scuds, famous from the 1991 war, improved by the Iraqis. May have been the Samud missiles. We'll try to talk more about that later. But we want to try to give you some context and perspective on what's happening this morning. When you keep in mind that television is a bit like a flashlight in that we can show you what's right at the end of the flashlight beam on television. But it's hard for us to explain or even know what's going on either side of the beam or above it or below it. So when we go to Scott Pelley there along the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border, and you hear a lot of gunfire from those helicopters hitting at what targets we don't know, but we believe that it's a precursor to the major ground war to follow. That's what's happening in that one area. What else is happening along the border, we don't know. But what we can tell you, and here we want to go to the map, what we can tell you is that U.S. forces are massed along this border. This is Kuwait down here. They're massed along this border. They intend to go with a 3-pronged ground attack. One would be to sort of cut off this southern area where they and protect the oil fields here. One in this direction, one this direction, one this direction. Now, there is a city down roughly in this area, al-Nasiriyah. Al-Nasiriyah, which is right along the Euphrates River, is the area in which it's believed that the better part of 2 Iraqi divisions are giving up. These are divisions posted down here. They're said to be divisions of the so-called People's Army of Iraq. Iraq has, you think of its army in 3 ways. They have the People's Army, mostly conscripts, then they have the Republican Guards. There's some Republican Guard units further up in here, and then they have the elite Republican Guards, Saddam Hussein's best. It's believed that most of his elite Republican Guard is back up in the Baghdad area and around Saddam Hussein's home area of Tikrit. And we had a report last night from our man, the Sky News operation that helps us in Baghdad, saying that it was his belief that some of the elite Republican Guard had indeed retreated into Baghdad. So the point right now, when we talk about Scott Pelley with this helicopter assault in this area being a prelude to a ground movement, it would make some sense. No one can say for certain this is the plan. It would make some sense for, say, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division to make a run for al-Nasiriyah in this area, because if there's going to be an area where U.S. troops are greeted with garlands and people cheering, it would be this Shiite area in here. Some of that happened during the last campaign. And also, the U.S. military now has the problem. The better part of 2 divisions reported to have surrendered. What do you do with those people? You cannot leave them in there having, in effect, run up a white flag, if that's what they've done, for very long. All of this is by way of saying that all bets are off now on what the order of battle may be. It may still turn out to be a major aerial offensive before the major ground offensive started. But we now must be alert to the possibility that the major ground assault could start either simultaneous at exactly the same time as the major aerial assault, or even it would be turned on its head, the ground assault would begin and the major air assault would follow shortly behind it. Let's go to the Pentagon and David Martin. David? Well, David may not be ready at the moment. He's, I think, on the telephone working one of his sources. So we're going to bring in Stephen Black while we let David Martin work one of his many very good sources. And when David Martin's on the telephone, it usually means that news is about to break out. I think David is just off the telephone now. David, are you with us?
I am, Dan.
Let's take a breath. Things have been moving very quickly this last half hour or so, and try to put in perspective the most recent developments. Right now, what is the most important thing for our viewers to know?
I think the most important strategic development in this war right now is the vacuum of leadership in Baghdad. Now, we don't know if Saddam Hussein was killed in that raid last night. The evidence is inconclusive. Somebody looking like him appeared on television. They are now trying to investigate whether or not that was a body double or the real Saddam. But even if it was the real Saddam, it could have been a pre-taped message. So the question is, was he killed in that raid, and who was with him? They had very good intelligence, signals intelligence, that put senior leaders, the tight circle around Saddam Hussein in that bunker, and all the reports they have gotten back from the pilots are that they destroyed that bunker. At the very least, Saddam Hussein and those around him have not been heard from, with the exception of that taped speech, since. So that means there's no one giving orders. So how much longer can this regime, which rules only by fear, last if the people who instill that fear are either dead or in hiding? So I think that is probably the most important development right now. Then you have the tactical developments on the ground, mostly in southern Iraq. You have the oil well fires that the Secretary of Defense said they have now spotted. And you have these reports that whole divisions of the Iraqi army are ready to capitulate. And I think that is what is speeding up the ground portion of this operation, to get to those oil wells before they all can be torched, and to take advantage of the fact that you are not going to encounter any resistance, and you can roll halfway to Baghdad before you have to worry about encountering the Republican Guard. And I think that is what is accelerating the pace of operations. The question in my mind right now is, are we going to see more strikes today in Baghdad to try and take advantage of this vacuum in leadership up there, to try and sow further fear among whoever is running things up there? And I think those issues are being decided right now.
David, it was interesting to hear the Secretary of Defense raise the possibility that the person we've seen on television, not knowing whether this person in Baghdad who was advertised as being Saddam Hussein is in fact Saddam Hussein, and we don't know whether this was on videotape or a live broadcast. We don't know whether, if it was recorded, it was recorded before the U.S. attacks on the Baghdad facility last night. There's widespread belief that this was Saddam Hussein appearing after the U.S. attacks on Baghdad. But Washington is working very hard to determine, one, was this a live broadcast or tape? I have to say that right now the preponderance of opinion is that it may very well have been videotaped. Then there's the question, was it Saddam Hussein? Let me pause and say that I've sat across from Saddam Hussein fairly recently, in recent weeks, and when I look at the picture, this is just one man's opinion who has been around Saddam Hussein some. This does indeed look like Saddam Hussein. If you had to bet the rent money, you'd have to bet it probably is he. But if you want to explore the possibility that it isn't Saddam Hussein, that it may be one of the many doubles he's known to have, you might check out, one, the fact that he wears eyeglasses, and let us say gently, rather bad eyeglasses at that. That is not very stylish. Now, we know that Saddam Hussein rarely has appeared with eyeglasses in public before. So that's one thing, and that he's someone who cares about his appearance, believing it's part of the, if you will, command presence. Now, we put up on the right side of your screen the Saddam Hussein whom I interviewed a few weeks ago, and on the left of the screen, this videotape. So the eyeglasses are one thing to look for. We rarely has anybody seen Saddam Hussein in public wear eyeglasses, certainly on television. That's a question mark. Secondly, because he has on the beret, he has his military uniform on, the beret is pretty hard to tell about the hairline. So if you want to sort of go through this analysis. If someone was concerned about the double being, sort of found out, the hairline is one of the first things you look at, so we can't tell on the hairline. Saddam Hussein, in this photograph, although he's in his military uniform, appears to have shoulders that are narrower than I recall them. But Saddam Hussein's suits are very well made, so during the interview he was in a suit, and we all know that a tailor can give you wider shoulders than you have. So just say his shoulders look a little thinner to me. And then, and this will end this, that as far as his face goes, of the person who appeared on television last night, supposedly, reportedly, allegedly Saddam Hussein, he does look a bit more jowly. He looks a little heavier through the bottom part of his face than the Saddam Hussein that I remember from the interview. So for whatever that may be worth, I want to repeat for emphasis that no one here is saying that it wasn't Saddam Hussein. All we're reporting is basically what the Secretary of Defense said, that they're checking it out to see, one, whether it was videotape or live, and two, whether it was in fact Saddam Hussein or some double. Now, David Martin's point is well taken. One of the early goals of the United States military attacks were to decapitate the Iraqi leadership, to kill it if they possibly can, and by all means cut it off from being able to communicate with its various forces around. Now, there's some early indications, just some early indications, that the communications between Saddam Hussein and or other leaders is not that good in the early going. Go back to David Martin now. David, what do you make of these helicopter attacks in the area where Scott Pelley has been reporting on the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border?
Dan, I would imagine that if we had perfect visibility along the entire border, we would see a lot more than just that one area in which helicopters are probing across the border. It's a combination reconnaissance and taking out any opposition that you encounter in the hours ahead, and I do mean hours ahead, before the main invasion force pushes off and starts moving up either toward Basra or straight on toward Baghdad. And meanwhile, there are more and more American troops on the ground inside Iraq with each passing hour. The U.S. Special Operations Forces are going in there looking for the Scud missiles out in the western desert, trying to get to those burning oil fields, trying to get to these divisions that are ready to surrender. And there's actually been one instance in which an American helicopter flying a special operations team made too hard a landing inside Iraq, and it could not be flown out of Iraq, and they actually had to destroy it on the ground there so it wouldn't fall into Iraqi hands. So weeks ago we used to talk about how this was going to be a rolling start to this war, and I don't think we envisioned this kind of rolling start, but that's exactly what we're seeing, a rolling start to this war.
David Martin reporting live.